Good morning again from Silicon Valley. This is another Mind the Chat. This is Marco Marinucci from Mind the Bridge. And today we have the great pleasure to have a friend here on our interviews. This is Ash Fontana, managing partner of Zetta Venture Partners. Hi, Ash. How you doing?
Ciao, Mario. I'm good.
Very good to see you again. I have the pleasure of knowing Ash for, I don't know how long now. I mean, it must be definitely more than a decade.
Wow.
I was just checking a while. I was just checking how many things you have done since we've known each other. I'm pretty much constant. You have done a million other things. So that's definitely a good catch up on that. So why don't we start from that? A little bit of your background, born and raised in Australia, what took you to Silicon Valley and the rest, real quick.
Yeah, sure. I was born and raised in Australia to Italian parents, immigrant family. So a strong drive to start companies, and everyone in my family has started a company, a separate company, which is very strange because, we arrived with very little and just got going. Then I got pretty interested in computers, but I was also interested in investing. So I sort of did a bit of both, learned a bit about both, and eventually just realized if I wanted to start a technology company, I had to move over to the US. So I did a bit of college there and whatnot and moved over, worked on the investing side for a while for a very large institutional investor, then started a company. Then we moved that company from New York to San Francisco. Then we sold that company. And then I joined Naval and Nivi and the team. The team at that point was 5 people at AngelList. And we started, to turn AngelList into a business. And that's what I was really responsible for there. And that was a phenomenal experience. And then a couple of years after that, realized that a lot of the most valuable technology was built on some sort of intelligent system. And that's when I met my partner, Mark, who had got a fund underway to focus on that. And I joined him 1 year in, and that's Zetta. And we focus on investing in AI first companies. And so that's what I've done for the better part of a decade now, to the point where I've accumulated a fair bit of knowledge around, the notion of an AI first company, how to bring AI into the real world. And so I wrote that all down into a book last year because there wasn't that much to do last year when you were sitting at home. So I wrote it into a book, and Penguin published that book in May.
There we go. Speaking of a few things in a few years. So what years are a couple of things actually I never asked you. I think actually you study law, right? At university. Yep. And how did you move from law to tech? Because you seem to be very much interested in technology from the very beginning. I remember that you had a company at the time that paid for your study.
Yeah. I was never in law, so I was never a lawyer. And I was in tech, so to speak, 10 years before I even went to law school. I was working on websites and whatnot at high school. I had a company that was putting together local office networks and networking computers and stuff. So I was in tech well before law. I went to law school because it's really hard, and hard things are satisfying to do. It's really useful if you want to do deals in life. And it's also, I think, a very important thing to study if you want to be a good citizen and sort of work out how things get done at the political, judicial, and other levels in society. So that's why I studied it, and I'm really, really glad I did. Now, again, I never became a lawyer, but frankly, I use it every day. I was using it half an hour ago. So using it meaning my JD. So I'm very glad I did that.
Ah, that's awesome. And I remember one of the last time that we had the pleasure of having you as a speaker. You had just launched the syndicates at AngelList, which was a huge undertaking and still a key one, I think, for the development of the investment at the masses. And there may be a couple of words about that experience, because I think that's a very important part of the development, really, of the investment community. Speaking also that attached to the fact that probably also your background in law also helped you in navigating the complexity of how to create syndicates at scale.
Yeah. So there was the notion of investing online in startups, and then there was the notion of forming a syndicate. And so when I got to AngelList, I realized we were putting together all these investment rounds. We were linking up investors with startups, but we weren't doing two things. One, we weren't making it easy for people to accept investment from multiple investors at once. That can be very difficult administratively. And we weren't, frankly, like capturing any of the value we were creating in putting these investment rounds together and making these connections and facilitating these investments that wouldn't have otherwise been made. And I saw an opportunity to essentially create like a lot of mini funds for every round. And that was the notion of investing online. And today they're called roll-up vehicles, and there's lots of different products that have spawned off this, syndicates, funds, etc. But the fundamental infrastructure is around creating funds really quickly and really cheaply. And initially, that was going to cost $40,000 to $80,000 per round. And we got that down to 10% of that. We got that down 90%. And that was just a lot of work on the structuring side. And again, law degree came in handy there. A lot of work on the negotiation side, a lot of work on the procurement side, finding fund managers, and a lot of work just around automation. And so that was part one, letting people invest at all online. And then part two was, Naval came in one day and he's like, well, hang on, all these people are investing online in all these things, and we're effectively putting together each of these deals. Why don't we let anyone put together a deal? And so he had this bright idea, and I still thought, well, yeah, that's an amazing idea. And so went away and sort of worked with the team to implement that, and that became syndicates. Then once we had so many syndicates happening, we had a lot of deals, and the problem became one of sort of curation and portfolio construction. And that is, how do you make sure you're investing in the good ones? And so then we created funds on top of AngelList that Naval and Kevin there and I managed, as in we chose the investments to put into those funds. So it was sort of like a startup mutual fund. And then we created something more like a startup index fund. And so you can see how once you got step one right, which is get the costs low, make it easy to put people into a group that invests in a company, and make all the information flows very clear, and the tax reporting and just the information about the investment, then you can start doing all these other cool things. And so that's what we worked really hard on in the early days, and that's what enabled a lot of the products you see today.
And that's, I think, a perfect transition to Zetta as a VC fund. So a couple of words just to identify the current structure, a little bit of history, and what's investment thesis.
Yeah, really simple. Zetta invests in AI first companies. It invests in companies very early on, usually when they're just at the point where they've got a demo, a prototype, some sort of predictive model that's showing some promise in terms of its accuracy, and they're just starting to approach customers. They may have got one or two customers, they may have just done a POC, they may not have got any of them yet, but at least they've done a demo. And we invest at that point and help companies get to their sort of first $1 million in revenue, or get to their first significant degree of customer traction, and only B2B, no direct to consumer stuff. So AI first, seed, and B2B, that's what we do.
And that's a third fund, I think you just raised, correct?
So a bit of history. Fund one was effectively January 2014, Fund two, January 2017, and Fund three just after that in 2020. So 3 funds, we work with dozens and dozens of companies now. Some of them have exited, some of them are IPO'd, and we work really closely with those companies. We get really involved in the early stages, the first couple of years of a company's life, provide the first couple of $1 million of capital, and then get them to a point where they're fundable or profitable, or they sell. And our track record there is really good. None of the companies have not got to that point. They've all got to. some sort of degree beyond that, raised more money, sold, got profitable, something like that.
So a little bit of history of the waves of technology on AI and why AI now. I was studying when I graduated, actually in engineering. I was studying AI with a support here at Stanford of John McCarthy, and that was research. I mean, there was very little application; it was more directional. There's very little, and then something incredible happened, and then today's is AI is everywhere. So what has been the major, I think, technological breakthrough that
Yeah.
made the AI technology so central?
Yeah, like a lot of these things, it's never one thing. It's easy to get hagiographic about this and try to sort of narrow it down to one thing you can center a narrative on. But it was just so many things happening at once. Yeah, there was a lot of good research going on. There was a resurgence in interest in neural networks or the modeling of neural networks on computational substrates as a way to get machines to learn.
Yeah.
And that research is really good, and was dropped for a while. It was underfunded for a while or defunded for a while, but it picked up again in a really significant way around 2012 because there was a lot more data available then as well. You got mobile phones everywhere collecting all sorts of data, lots of sensors, etc. And then distributed computing played a huge part in this. Basically creating the cloud meant we could compute more cheaply and more efficiently than ever. So that played a big role too. And when all of these three things come together, you can finally compute these deep neural networks. You can finally feed data in, run them over many, many layers of a network, run a network with many, many layers. One feeds into the next, passes its lessons on, so to speak, to really simplify things and generate real output. And that's when we saw things like the computer vision models getting really good, like some of the speech recognition models getting pretty good, text generation models recently getting very good. And it's sort of been a lot of the same since then. We've seen a lot of progress in lots of different subfields of machine learning and AI. But that was when it all started coming together again. And that's when Zetta started. Zetta started in 2013. It's called Zetta because that was the first year a zettabyte of data went across the internet. That's 10 to the 21 bytes. And that represents really the start of an era where, you can learn over very large volumes of data with these models.
So, from a point of view, what is the today kind of the core technology development in terms of AI that is becoming available to most of the industries? What do you think will be the major next development in the next 5 to 10 years? That's where obviously you are betting as a fund, right? In the medium to long term.
Okay, I'm going to give a bit of an annoying answer. One, I don't make bets, I make investments. Two, I don't like to prognosticate about the research direction. And three, there's so many different fields making so much progress. And so there's no one thing that is worth focusing on or is going to make the difference between a certain industry adopting it or not. The reality is all of these things are happening all at once. We're getting better at data management. We're getting better at data generation, generating synthetic data. We're getting better at data labeling, more efficiently having humans add their expertise to the process of labeling data, adding metadata to an image or something like that. We're getting better at that. We're getting better at computing these models. We're getting better at architecting these models so they're more efficient. They don't need so much computation or so much data. So all of these things are getting better every day. Like we're making so many developments. We're getting better at monitoring this stuff so that it doesn't break and we have to start all over again or it's really expensive to manage. So we're getting better at all of these things every day. And, the reality is in 5 to 10 years, 1,000 little steps later, all of a sudden it seems like it works so much better. All of a sudden we've got models that can generate, entire blog posts or news articles that actually make sense and are interesting to read. They can do that today, but they either don't make sense or are not interesting to read for the most part. Or we have super cheap speech transcription, which today is like either not very good and cheap, or pretty expensive and good. Maybe we'll get there. Language translation is another area. So many different sub areas of machine learning are getting better, but they need all these other things to happen at the same time. So yeah, the answer is it's sort of annoying, but it's realistic and it's encouraging, which is there's so much going on every day that the reality is all of the things I said, I think may play out over the next 5 to 10 years, and we have really good models in all of those different sub areas. But who knows which one comes first or how good they get or anything like that.
Is there any specific geographies where, I mean, talking about machine learning, we talk about the power of data. So the more the data, obviously, to simplify it for the masses, that you gather, the more intelligence your system can become. And so, I mean, there's a certain conversation happening in the background on who's gonna have that edge, right? I remember some actually ex-colleague at Google, Kai-Fu Lee, that is really also one of your colleagues actually in the industry of investing in AI for the long term, really mentioning the AI powers, China versus Silicon Valley. Do you see from your point of view any specific concentration that is geographically related of where these AI powers can be?
Yeah, this is a really easy question to answer because there are good numbers on this. And so to be clear, this isn't my opinion. This is empirically the case. That is, there's more AI research done these days in Europe and the UK, so combining the two for sure, than in the US or in China. More AI research published in those areas. Now, what's also interesting is there are more software developers to implement this research in Europe and the UK than the US or China. And so focusing on Europe and the UK, I think, is something that a lot of people haven't done, something that I do. I live over here, I should say, most of the year. I still have a team, an office, a house, and everything in San Francisco, and I lived there for 12 years. But no, I've been investing over here for about 8 years. Yeah, 8 years. And every year, it's just got to be the case that more and more, as every month went by, there were more companies here than there. And so I made the decision 2 years ago to focus a lot of my investing efforts here. Again, not totally, but the majority for sure. So there's some really good stuff here. Whether you look at the research institutions that have been developing AI arguably since the very beginning, like Cambridge, or in a very meaningful way for a long time, like Oxford robotics, all the areas associated with robotics and computer vision, or in like particularly novel areas like combining life sciences with AI, like they do really well at Imperial and UCL. Or if you look at some of the institutions on the continent that are world leading in areas like language processing and vision, like ETH, EPFL, or a few universities in France, these institutions that they've created there for machine learning and artificial intelligence, like INRIA. In Italy, you've got a really long history of mathematics and really strong mathematical talents and whatnot, whether it's a Padua or Pisa or wherever else. But then you've also got a really long history of engineering, and you've also got all these really big industrial companies that are generating a lot of data. And so then you see institutions pop up in like Trento, which is the region between Italy and Austria. For those who don't know, watching this, probably most do, that are really good at machine learning as well. And then you see all these schools in Austria actually have a really good computer science training. And then a lot of people going from that field in computer science and distributed systems into AI, because the first customers they work with are big industrial companies with lots of data. So I can go on and on as to the reasons why this is the case, but the numbers speak very clearly towards a focus on this area. For me, again, this is just what I do. For lots of other areas of technology, I wouldn't say this is the best place to be, but for what I do, I think it is.
I think it's an excellent point, and I think there's an opportunity. I think you're talking specifically about research and the also where the talent can reside. And I'm sure that actually I'm totally positive. I was when I was doing my AI research, by the way, was in Trento, and it was one of the first big
That's right.
international institutions actually back in the day,
Well, I mentioned.
way earlier than a bunch of other institutions actually, including here in the US. The one thing though, and with that I would conclude the conversation. The one thing that we're also launching during our summit in Silicon Valley is a research on the development of the, as we normally do, the scale-up economies, and we do comparative analysis between different geographies, and that's obviously slightly different. Is the ability to grow fast, and there is nothing like Silicon Valley for that. And I don't have to give the numbers, but it's still a significant, maybe in order of magnitude of difference between the rest of the world. The ability of scaling fast. Is there how do you play that as an investors, right? As a fund,
Yeah.
right? So one thing is the talent and the ability and the the intellectual property, and then is the scale.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time it's just inherently an ambition question. So if the founders have the ambition, they just need the help to realize it. And so then that's my job: surround them with the right people, provide them with the right amount of capital, and give them the right guidance. Basically, help them to move really quickly by not making the same mistakes everyone else has made in the past, by sharing my knowledge there. So if the ambition's there, I don't think it's an issue these days. You can, with the right investors and the right team around you, you can create companies absolutely anywhere. Location really is completely irrelevant in my mind. I didn't used to think that, but I very much do now. But again, that's assuming you have the right people at the top, and that's hard to pull together.
All right, and I think with that we can conclude our conversation. Ash, glad to have you again, and we'll see you in the next few years. We'll see all
Sure.
the updates that we're both up to. Thanks
All
again.
right. Thank you, Marco. This is great.
Thank